There are voices that sing, and then there are voices that heal worlds. For over 60 years, one woman carried both, a sound that wrapped pain in gold and sent it back to humanity as hope. Her name, Dolly Parton, the mountain child who sang through the dark until the stars listened. But tonight, that voice stands at the edge of silence. In the quiet hours before dawn, her sister Frida Parton wrote to the world. "I've been up all night praying for my sister, Dolly. She hasn't been feeling her best lately. I believe in the power of prayer, and I'm asking all of you to be warriors with me." When words like these come from blood, you can feel the tremor in heaven. This isn't a rumor. This is love crying out. From the ridges of Tennessee to the bright altars of Las Vegas, her voice once turned heartbreak into light, and loneliness into song. But even angels grow tired beneath the weight of what they carry. And now, as spotlights fade and America holds its breath, we ask the question no one dares to voice aloud. Will the song that healed millions find its own strength once more? If you have ever been mended by her melody, pause. Light something, a candle, a memory, a prayer. Because some legends don't just entertain, they anchor humanity. And tonight, the heart that taught us to hope is whispering back to the silence she once conquered. Pray with her. For the woman who gave her soul to every note. May the world now sing for her. Before she was a legend, she was a whisper. Before the glitter, before the spotlight, there was only wind, hunger, and a baby's cry echoing through the great Smoky Mountains. On January 19, 1946, a child was born not into comfort, but into faith tested by frost. Her name, Dolly Rebecca Parton. The night she came into the world, the stars stood far and cold, as if heaven itself was holding its breath. Inside a one-room cabin crouched between ridges, her mother labored by candlelight, her body trembling, her hope steady. They were so poor, they paid the doctor in cornmeal. And as he left, the cold pressed through the cracks like a living thing, wrapping around the newborn like prophecy. No lights. No water. No safety. Just breathe. Just faith. Just mountains. Outside, the trees moaned with the wind, a hymn older than scripture. Inside, a mother whispered a prayer, and the child opened her eyes. Those eyes, sky-colored, unyielding, would one day stare down the world itself. The cabin was more than wood and nails. It was a forge. Every creak was a lesson in endurance. Every shiver, a vow. Poverty was not a stranger, it was her first teacher. And from its grasp, she learned something no stage could ever teach. To turn suffering into sound. That night, the heavens did not announce her with trumpets, only silence, broken by the faint hum of a lullaby. But within that hush, destiny stirred. Because sometimes, the smallest cries rise to become the loudest echoes. And from the poorest cradle, a voice is born that will one day heal a world. In the Smoky Mountains, winters didn't arrive, they descended. They came like a presence, with breath that cut through timber and bone alike. And in that small cabin crouched beneath God's frozen sky, the Partons didn't live through the cold, they endured it. There were 12 children. One blanket. Nights when the fire died and silence grew teeth. Dolly would wake to see her breath rise before her face, a ghost of warmth fading too fast to keep. The cabin walls groaned, the boards shivered, and still they huddled close. Human kindling against the dark. That was her first choir, the sound of survival. Each creak of the floorboards, each groan of the wind, a rhythm that taught her to find music inside the ache. Her father, Robert Lee Parton, could not read or write, but his hands knew scripture. They spoke in labor, in calluses, in sacrifice. Before dawn he was already gone, building roads, hauling gravel, fighting against hunger with nothing but grit and love. Her mother, Avi Lee, sang to keep despair from finding the door. Her voice, though worn thin, carried stories like medicine. Even when the food ran low, even when the sky refused to break, she sang. And her children, all 12, listened, learning that faith isn't spoken, it's lived. When Dolly stirred the beans, fetched the creek water, rocked the smallest ones to sleep, she didn't know she was rehearsing for eternity. Every motion was a lyric, every breath a verse. Those winters were merciless. But they forged something greater than comfort. They built a soul that would not shatter. And from that cold, a fire was born. A fire named Dolly. There are moments so quiet, the world itself seems to bow. For 9-year-old Dolly, that silence came dressed in winter. Her baby brother Larry was born, breathed for 4 days, and then the music stopped. There was no funeral, no choir, no polished casket. Only a small patch of earth behind the cabin, where the frost met the tears of a mother who could not speak. The ground was hard. The air, hollow. And inside that stillness, something in Dolly's world changed forever. Her mother folded her hands like broken wings. Her father worked longer hours, as if labor could fill the hole left in the house. And the little girl who sang to chase away darkness now met a silence she could not outsing. It pressed against her chest, cold, vast, and unanswerable. Children aren't meant to understand death, only to feel it. And she did. Every night. In the hush between her mother's sighs and the creak of the rafters, she felt it. The brother she would never see grow, never hear laugh, became a shadow stitched to every song she would ever write. Years later, she would whisper that some melodies were conversations with the ones who never got to stay. Because when she sang, it wasn't fame she reached for, it was the voices she had lost. Larry became her first ghost, her first prayer, her first proof that music could bridge what life had broken. And though the world would one day hear her voice and call it divine, it began here, beside a grave no one marked, beneath a sky that did not answer. In that silence, she learned the oldest truth. That love, once buried, can still learn how to sing. Sometimes love arrives not as gold or glory, but as cloth. Torn, mismatched, imperfect, and divine. It was winter again in the Smoky Mountains when Dolly Parton, weary but unwavering, sat by candlelight stitching together a gift for her daughter. Scraps of fabric, some red, some blue, some frayed by years of wear, became her canvas. She sewed not garments, but prayers. Each thread carried a promise: you may have nothing, but you are never nothing. When the coat was finished, little Dolly slipped it on with pride. To her, it shimmered brighter than silk. To the other children at school, it was a joke. Laughter cut sharper than any wind. They saw rags, she saw resurrection. And through tears that burned against the cold, she walked home taller, holding her chin high, carrying her mother's love like armor. That night, Dolly wrapped her arms around her and said, "They don't know what love looks like, baby." And Dolly understood. Pain could humiliate you, or it could transform you. Years later, she would turn that moment into a song, coat of many colors. A hymn for every heart that ever felt small. A reminder that worth is not worn, it's woven. When she sang it, audiences wept, not because it was sad, but because it was true. The girl who once stood shivering in ridicule now stood beneath 1,000 lights, proving that love stitched in poverty can outshine any crown. Her mother's gift became a map, from shame to grace, from tears to triumph. And every time she sang that song, the thread pulled tight once more, connecting the woman the world adored. To the little girl who first learned that love is the only fabric that never fades. Long before the world knew her name, before the rhinestones, before the applause, music found her first. It didn't arrive in a concert hall or on a stage. It crept softly into a one-room cabin, through hunger and frost, whispering, "Sing or you'll disappear." By 7 years old, Dolly Parton had already discovered her weapon, a trembling voice that could lift sorrow and hand it back as light. She wrote songs before she could spell them. Words scrawled on scraps of paper, verses carved from pain too deep for childhood. Her lullabies were for ghosts, the brother she lost, the hunger that lingered, the silence that grew teeth. Each note was a heartbeat refusing to quit. Each melody, a prayer to the heavens that forgot her address. She didn't sing to be heard. She sang to stay alive. While other children chased games and dreams of plenty, Dolly chased echoes. She found rhythm in the wind through pine, harmony in the crackle of the wood stove, percussion in the steady hammer of her father's toil. Even loneliness became her choir. And in that small, fragile body, something immortal began to stir, a sound shaped by endurance, sharpened by sorrow, softened by faith. It was the music of a girl who had nothing, yet gave everything. Later in life, she would say quietly, "I didn't write to be famous. I wrote to survive." Those words were not metaphors, they were memories. Because in the hollow silence of the Smoky Mountains, music was not a choice. It was breathtaking. It was blood. It was the promise that no matter how cold the world became, a single song, sung from truth, could keep the night from winning. No prophecy ever whispered that a barefoot girl from Locust Ridge would one day touch the sky, but destiny knew. And when the time came, it called her down from the hills. By 10 years old, her voice carried the clarity of rivers and the ache of 100 winters. When Dolly Parton sang, strangers stopped mid-step. Her sound didn't just echo, it entered people. It was innocence laced with revelation. In 1956, her uncle Bill Owens took her hand and said, "Let's go find the world." Together they packed a battered guitar, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and a dream too large for the mountains to hold. Their old car rattled down dirt roads toward distant radio towers that blinked like lighthouses. They slept in borrowed rooms, prayed over empty gas tanks, and watched the dawn rise through cracked windows, two souls chasing a sound that might change everything. Every mile was hungry. Every note, a prayer. But the fire inside her burned steady. When she finally graduated high school in 1964, there was no crowd, no music, no confetti. Just a dirt road, a cardboard suitcase, and $20, enough for a one-way Greyhound to Nashville. She looked back once at the ridges that raised her, mountains fading into mist, and whispered, "I'll make it, or I won't come back at all." That vow was her passport to destiny. The bus rolled on, carrying a girl who owned nothing but her voice, a voice forged in hunger, tempered by loss, baptized in faith. And as the wheels hummed beneath her, she didn't just leave home. She crossed the invisible line between surviving and becoming. When the Greyhound hissed to a stop, the city of Nashville shimmered like a promise. Neon lights burned hot, street corners buzzed with guitars, and every shadow hid a dreamer chasing forever. But for Dolly Parton, forever didn't open its arms, it crossed them. She was 19, armed with nothing but hunger and hymns. The voice that silenced mountains was called too country, too raw, too real. They wanted polish, not truth. They dressed her in borrowed songs, told her to smile wider, sing softer, and sound like someone else. Each studio session felt like a costume she couldn't breathe in. The girl who had once sung to survive now sang to please, and each note bruised. "I felt like I was wearing someone else's skin," she'd whisper years later. The records flopped. The calls stopped. And for a moment, the city that promised to make her name nearly stole her soul. But Dolly was mountain-born. When others bent, she burned. At night, in a room lit only by a flickering bulb, she wrote on scraps of paper, old receipts, torn envelopes, songs born from the ache of invisibility. Her hands cramped, her stomach ached, but her fire didn't fade. She hummed into the dark just to hear proof she was still alive. Then came 1966. A song co-written with her Uncle Bill, Put It Off Until Tomorrow, slipped quietly into the world. It rose like dawn, climbing charts no one thought she'd ever touch. And suddenly, Nashville turned its head. "Who is Dolly Parton?" they asked. She answered not with words, but with her debut. "Hello, I'm Dolly." It wasn't just an album. It was a declaration. The moment a silenced girl became an unstoppable woman. By the early 1970s, the lights loved her, but the room grew colder. Fame had arrived, but freedom hadn't. Every note she sang shimmered for millions, yet somewhere beneath the glitter, her soul whispered, "This isn't mine anymore." On the Porter Wagoner show, she was sunshine wrapped in sequins, radiant, smiling, divine. But behind the camera, storms gathered. Each song she wrote cut too deep, too true, for an industry that preferred its women soft and silent. They wanted a muse. She was a mirror, and mirrors make people uneasy. She owed much to Porter, the man who opened every door. But love cannot live inside a cage. And the day came when gratitude had to give way to truth. Leaving meant shattering the illusion that built her. To walk away was to risk everything. But she chose the harder road, not rebellion, rebirth. And she didn't scream her farewell. She sang it. I will always love you. Those words weren't lyrics, they were scripture. A prayer for the man she was leaving, the life she was shedding, and the girl inside her still asking for permission to fly. When she recorded it, the world fell silent. Because somehow, every listener heard their own heartbreak heal. She cried all the way to the top of the charts. And when the applause came, it didn't sound like triumph, it sounded like release. At that moment, Dolly didn't just become an artist. She became a force. Her goodbye wasn't an ending, it was the sound of chains breaking. And from that day forward, the world didn't just hear her voice. It listened. After the farewell, the world thought they'd heard her final cry. But in 1973, Dolly Parton didn't weep, she roared. Her voice birthed Jolene, a song so haunting it cut through the noise like a single candle in a cathedral of dark. It wasn't just melody, it was a mirror. And when the world looked in, it saw itself trembling. But behind that brilliance, a storm brewed. By day, she smiled beneath blinding lights. By night, she wrote alone in motel rooms, ink smeared by exhaustion, guitar pressed against her skin like armor. Each chord was confession, each lyric a wound trying to breathe. The mid-70s devoured her. Endless tours. Relentless interviews. Smiles rehearsed between sleepless nights. Her sequins sparkled brighter than ever, but they hid a body running on painkillers, coffee, and willpower. The woman who healed millions was bleeding behind the curtain. And yet, she refused to break. Because for Dolly, pain was never the ending, it was the chorus. When critics called her too pretty to be profound, she sharpened her pen. When Nashville tried to box her in, she built her own stage. Every bruise became ink. Every tear, a verse. By 1977, Here You Come Again crashed through the walls of country music, storming not just charts, but boundaries. Purists called it betrayal. She smiled and said, I wasn't leaving the country, I was taking it with me. That was no defense. That was a revolution. Because in her hands, country music didn't just survive, it evolved. She carried the mountains into the mainstream. And from the fire of those years, she rose, not untouched, but unbroken. Proof that even the softest voice can burn through history. By 1980, the whole world knew her name, but few knew the price she paid to make it echo. Dolly Parton stood at the summit, her songs crossing borders, her laughter lighting screens. And yet, behind that glittering crown, her body trembled. The hours were merciless, 12-hour film shoots, sleepless nights, endless interviews. Fame's furnace blazed, and she kept feeding it pieces of herself. Each handshake, each photograph, each performance, a withdrawal from the same heart that had already given everything. And then came a sleepless night on a movie set beside Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, when frustration turned into fire and fire turned into song. She tapped her red nails on a desk, a rhythm of rebellion, and out came the anthem that would shake the world. Workin' 9 to 5. It wasn't just a hit, it was a war cry. A hymn for every woman who rose before dawn, carried the weight of the world, and smiled anyway. The song soared beyond genre, beyond borders, into every heart that had ever been tired. But as the world danced, Dolly began to break. Behind the humor and the hair was a woman burning out. The painkillers numbed her body, but not the ache. Some nights, she looked into the mirror and saw only the costume, not the girl who sang to survive. The applause roared, but the silence after it was deafening. Still, she sang. Because music was the only medicine she trusted. Her voice was shaking, but her faith was not. Even at her breaking point, she didn't shatter, she shone through the cracks. Reminding the world that true power isn't found in perfection, but in the courage to keep singing when your soul is tired. There are storms that roar, and there are storms that whisper. By the mid-1980s, Dolly Parton was living inside the latter. The crowd still cheered, the lights still burned, the gold still gleamed. But somewhere beneath it all, something sacred was slipping away. The body that once carried her through sleepless nights and endless stages began to rebel. Doctors gave it a name, endometriosis, a cruel thief that stole her strength and shattered her dream of motherhood. The surgery saved her life but silenced a lifetime of hopes. When the nurses left and the room went still, she lay beneath the dim light, hand resting on her stomach, whispering to a future that would never arrive. No cameras. No applause. Only the hum of the air vent and the ticking of a clock, counting moments she could never reclaim. For the first time, she couldn't turn pain into song. The silence pressed against her, heavy as stone. The woman who once lifted nations now wondered if she could lift herself. And one night, in that quiet war, she almost didn't. Until a sound, small, unassuming, broke through the dark. Her dog, Popeye, padded in, eyes wide, heart steady. He asked for nothing, only her presence. And in that tiny heartbeat, she remembered, life still needed her. Tears came like rain after a drought. Not weakness, renewal. The storm hadn't taken her. It had stripped her down to truth. When she rose again, it wasn't for charts or fame, it was to breathe. To write not from glitter, but from grace. And through that pain, Dolly Parton was reborn. Not as an idol, but as proof that even when faith falters, love can still sing you back to life. Before the world knew Dolly Parton, one man already did. Not the legend. Not the rhinestones. Not the light. Just the woman, barefoot, laughing, hair undone, humming in a kitchen still half-shadowed by dawn. His name was Carl Dean, and he never needed the world to understand what he saw. Where others saw a spectacle, he saw stillness. Where others saw a star, he saw home. For nearly 6 decades, he was her anchor, the silence that steadied her thunder, the unseen heartbeat behind her every triumph. When the world screamed her name, he whispered, "Baby." When cameras flashed, he stayed in the background, because his love didn't need witnesses. And then, in 2025, the music paused. At 82, Carl slipped quietly into eternity, inside the same Nashville house they built with prayer and patience. No spotlight. No farewell tour. Just one final breath between two souls who had outloved time. The silence that followed was not empty, it was sacred. Friends said she stopped answering calls. My meals went cold. Even her guitar, the one he gave her before her first hit, rested untouched by the window. When the day came to say goodbye, Dolly chose a small cedar chapel on their land, not a spectacle, but a sanctuary. Wildflowers lined the altar, the kind he used to pick and leave on her kitchen table. She stood before his casket, eyes locked on the man who saw her before the myth was born. Her voice trembled, then broke. She read his last letter. "You were always my shining star. But I never needed the world to know, just you." And when she sang one final song for him, even heaven leaned closer to listen. When the world's noise fades, only truth remains. And in the great house that once rang with laughter, Dolly Parton now lives among echoes. The mansion in Brentwood, Tennessee still gleams, sunlight spills across marble floors, fountains hum outside, and gardens bloom defiantly, but inside, the air holds its breath. Because love has left the room. Every morning, before dawn, she rises out of habit, not hunger. In the kitchen, she brews 2 cups of coffee, just as she always did, one steaming gently across from an empty chair. Sometimes she forgets, and speaks aloud before remembering there's no voice to answer back. His boots still wait by the door. His newspaper lies folded on the armrest, untouched since that morning when time decided it had done enough. Even the rocking chairs on the porch know, one sways in the breeze, the other stands still. She walks through rooms lined with golden memory, yet none of it hums like the sound of him breathing beside her. The woman who once sang the world back to life now hums to the walls, soft prayers disguised as melodies. Most mornings, her steps lead to the chapel Carl built at the edge of their land. Inside, the scent of cedar and candle wax fills the air. She sits on the first pew, whispers his name, and sings songs no one will ever hear. Each note floats upward, fragile, trembling, as if love itself were learning to find form again. In those moments, she was not the queen of the country. She is a woman, alone but not abandoned, wrapped in a silence so deep, it feels like God is listening. Because even when love goes quiet, it never leaves. At 79, the woman who once outran silence has finally made peace with it. Her name glimmers in granite, etched forever into music's memory, yet here, inside her Tennessee home, time moves gently. It no longer rushes. It listens. The world still calls her legend. But legends are lonely things. When the applause fades and the air grows still, all that remains is the hum of her own heartbeat, echoing in rooms built from both triumph and tears. Each day begins before sunrise, when faith stirs her from sleep. She brews her coffee, still 2 cups, out of love, not habit, and lets morning light spill across the quiet table. Sometimes she speaks aloud to the empty space, not expecting a reply, but knowing love still lingers in the air like music long after the last note fades. Her health, once unshakable, now bends beneath the weight of time. Doctors urge rest, her sister Frida asks the world to pray. The stage lights she once commanded now wait patiently for her return. And she smiles, that same unbreakable smile, whispering, "Honey, I've been through worse. The Lord's got me." This is her season of stillness, but not surrender. Between treatments and rest, she drifts to her studio, a small, sunlit sanctuary lined with guitars and framed memories. There, she writes songs softer than breath, melodies stitched from gratitude and grace. Each one a prayer disguised as a lullaby. For though her hands tremble and her breath slows, her spirit keeps perfect time. Because the girl from the mountains who once sang to survive now sings to prepare. To leave behind not echoes, but light. There are voices that fade, and then there are voices that become time itself. At 79, Dolly Parton stands not at the end of her journey, but at the edge of eternity, a soul whose every note has carried someone through a storm. From the hollows of the Smoky Mountains to the halls of immortality, her story has never been about fame. It has been about faith. Every lyric, a prayer whispered through hunger. Every melody, a bridge over sorrow. Every silence, a sanctuary for those who needed hope. Now, as the world kneels once more, answering her sister's call for prayer, the woman who taught us resilience faces the quiet with grace. She has nothing left to prove, yet everything left to give. Her eyes, softer now, still shine like morning after long rain. Her hands tremble, but they still write. And each word carries the same vow she made as a child beside the fire: keep singing, no matter what tries to silence you. Her legacy is not carved in gold records or gilded halls. It lives in every heart her voice has healed, every soul lifted by a song written in pain and delivered in love. Because when Dolly Parton sings, the world remembers its own mercy. As her body slows and her breath steadies, the music continues, carried now by millions who learned from her how to endure. And when her final curtain falls, it will not close in silence. It will open to eternity, where her laughter still rings through the valleys. Her songs still rise like morning mist. And her voice, tender, timeless, unbroken, keeps reminding us all: love never leaves. It just changes its key.